was really tidy. They have it like tucked in because like I don't know why I made that assumption before of like the kids who didn't tuck in their uniform. They were like, oh, those are the bad kids. They're the disobedient kids. They don't listen. Like I made that assumption. I made that assumption
And
that if you don't, like if
with,
you're
with some of my friends where
mm,
they wore, I don't know if you guys ever remember this, where back in the days where people would wear all black and then leather, and then their makeup would be very dark, and they would have all kinds of jewelry on.
mm,
That was like some type of a fashion statement. But I always thought those were scary people because
mm,
they're always wearing black and they're so gloomy.
mm,
And one of my friends that's how she was the whole time she was going to school. But then when I got to know her, I mean, she's like the most colorful person. Is just her wardrobe was all black, and that's how she wanted people to perceive her. But once you got to know her, she was just like the sweetest thing. And even now, because she's got a child, and I bring it up, I'm like, oh, you're gonna dress her up all in black and leather and all. She goes, no, I don't know what I was thinking back then, but you can see her personality in the way she dresses her child now, because her child is very colorful. And so I think what I've learned is sometimes people say things about certain people, and then that's the assumption you make. But
mm,
I've learned that I don't care what people say anymore. I'm going to get to know the person and find out who they are before I start making my own assumptions. Because, sometimes people don't make the right assumptions and they try to pass it on to others just to, like, oh, be on my side and not their side, kind of a thing. And so I think it's just really important that we have to get to know people before we start assuming what they are or who they are.
mm. Yeah, good. So you're what you said about the wearing like all black. That was me at one point, one point in my life where it's like I found that like black is just easy to match with like anything. So I just wore a lot of like black. Like even now, I would say most of my clothes are like if it's not black, it's like a dark a dark color, a dark shade of that color because I just find it easier to match it with with other clothes. But I and when I first started wearing glasses, I wasn't used to it, so I made this face a lot. Like I kind of like I squinted my eyes a lot, and a lot of people thought that I was angry. Like he always has a frown in his face. That's sort of like the I guess the assumptions that people make of me because I've had people ask me why I'm mad, and I'm like, oh, I'm not mad. I'm just I'm trying to I'm trying to see because my eyes are hurting. I'm trying to look. I'm trying to look at this. And I remember one interaction. We were eating at the cafeteria, and I was eating my food, and my friend he was like, "Why are you angry at like the rice?" I'm like, "I'm not angry at the rice. I'm trying to see it." I can't see the rice because my eyes hurt from like wearing glasses because that was like the first year that I wore glasses, so I wasn't used to it. But that was the initial, and so it just so happened to also be like the new school year. Like that was my first year like in high school as well, and I know a lot of them kind of saw me as like I didn't what is it in English? Masungit. You're
Like
Snobby.
snobby, yeah.
snobby. Yeah,
Attitude,
yeah.
yeah.
Like a lot of, I feel like a lot of them saw me as snobby because I always had a frown. But it wasn't a frown. I was just squinting. I was just squinting from that. So it like definitely what Arnie said earlier like reminded me of like you tend to make these assumptions or like even I know some of them have even may have seen me as just gloomy because of how I dress in a lot of black. I dress in a lot of black in combination with like always frowning. It wasn't a good look for me looking back. It wasn't a good look for me to to be like that. ask you guys, like just before we move on, like how did like your initial assumption of someone, or how do you think like the assumptions that we make of people, like how do you think it affects like our interactions with them? You can. I'd love to hear like from your own experiences, like how assumptions have affected your initial interaction with people.
I think sometimes when we make assumptions about people, we may try to steer clear of them because of what we're assuming who they are or what they do. And
Mhm.
so I know there's a lot of people who I would never approach because I didn't think they would be someone I could get along with. But then
Mhm.
after observing them for a while, or just the random "hello, how are you" kind of a thing, and then starting to talk to people, I start to realize like, oh, they're actually really nice. And so I think if you make assumptions about people, you could miss out on great relationships and great having great people in your life. And so I think it's really important to really say hello first and get to know them before you start assuming. Yeah, I don't think we're gonna get along because they don't speak English, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So I
Mhm.
think that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, yeah. Like I like what you said about just just saying hi to them instead of instead of sitting in that corner and just thinking of like, oh, I think they're this. I think they're this, and that. They're this kind of person. I don't think we'll get along. Just say hi to them. Uh, Pulling from like a recent experience, like I made a friend where like I made a friend with someone who I thought at first we wouldn't get along because they seemed like extroverted, and I would say the initial interactions they like initial interactions I would have assumed that I was accurate with that with that uh, with that assessment of them that they were extroverted. But what I realized about them is that a lot of it was them pushing themselves to be to be extroverted. But they were really like as like when I got to know them more, like, oh, you're a really shy person. Just like it's just the way that they when they meet someone new, they sort of like put on like this brave face of like, okay, I'm gonna say hi to them, I'm gonna welcome them, and like it's like an opposite of like what Tony was saying earlier about like the people who's like initial meeting they seem shy, but then as soon as you get to know them, oh, I can't get them to stop talking. They're so like because oh yeah, because of like how like initially when you met them, you're like, oh, you're a really shy person. Nope, they were not. They were just gauging if you're like if you're someone they can talk to about the things that they like. And I saw you on mute, so go ahead then.
No, I just know because Nate had said something on here which I thought, well, first of all, it's funny, but it's true when you start making assumptions about people because he says when he looks at you, he thinks you like to solve crime in Fort Lauderdale in the 80s, and he's totally wrong on that. But and do you see how like how assumptions affect people? If you think they're one thing but they're totally not, because I don't think you solve crimes in Fort Lauderdale, right?
Yeah, yes. I'm thinking maybe because of what I'm wearing, that's the assumption. Or I guess that's what I look like based on like what I'm wearing. But this isn't always the style I'm wearing. Sometimes I just want to put on like a neon blue like hoodie, a neon blue hoodie, and if I wear that, if I wear that today, I wouldn't look like like I wouldn't look like well, to quote to quote Nate there, I wouldn't look like I solve crimes in Fort Lauderdale in the 80s, right? Like it, and it's hard to also gauge someone's like personality just based on like what they're wearing at the moment. Because like for me personally, I have a lot of like different styles. It just depends on how I feel that day. Like what I wanna, the style I wanna go with. It's not summary, right, of who I am as a person. So like what you said, Arnie, just talk to them, get to know them like personally, right? But you did mention earlier, you brought up rumors, which is another. I think another another aspect of like assumptions or judgments, right? So, uh, just getting right into it. Like, has there ever been a time where you heard a rumor about someone and it's sort of like affected your perception of them, like how you see them?
Yes. I feel like for a lot of these answers, it's the ones that I'm remembering more is less about me making assumptions about others, but people making assumptions about me.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel like that's what I'm remembering more than like when I've made assumptions about people because um in my head I feel like I have like assumptions like maybe like what I said it's like that first like few moments, but I try my best. Not all the time, but I try my best to kind of um unpack that so that that's not the only thing that I remember about people. But
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like assumptions about what other people have assumed about me, like I feel like people assume a lot of different things just by seeing how I was. Like, oh, she's like goody two shoes and like she thinks that she's perfect and whatever and blah blah blah
You
blah.
heard
And it's
things
like,
being said about you?
I mean, not directly, but like some things just kind of come up
Mm-hmm.
at times, right? Um, and it's I don't know what place that it comes from, right? I don't know the reason why these things come up, but um, I think in terms of it's also affected how I kind of perceive other people as well because of those things that have happened to me. I don't want to be in the position where I do that to someone else because I know how it feels. Where it's like, well, that's not the only thing. Because when we see people like in these different instances, it's like they're just instances that you're seeing them. Like even your friends, like you don't see the whole of who they are. Like I make mistakes like all the time, but I don't know if people think that I think that I don't make mistakes or like they think that I'm perfect. Like no, like I'm also human. Like I'm also prone to messing up, and it happens, and I try to move past it and move on from that. But if you're not careful sometimes, because to go to your question, the way that you have these whatever the rumor may be or whatever the saying that they're saying about a person, the way that it can color your interaction with them is not always so overt. It can be very subtle in the way that like maybe you don't feel as trusting towards them because you're like, oh well, I heard that so and so is like this, or I don't feel as comfortable being around them because I heard so and so is it's different things that again they're just rumors. You don't always have the confirmation, and sometimes you don't always get the confirmation. um so it's always nice to tread lightly and kind of talk to people and feel them out and just be careful, I guess, in the way that you try to think about others.
And I think I agree with Tony on that because even with me, when we talk about assumptions, like I said, I used to make assumptions when I was much younger. Now I don't, I hardly do. But you do. I've experienced it many times where I've become friends with people now, and they always say, "Oh, when I first saw you, I thought you were a snob, and you're so nice." And I'm like, "Huh?" And it wasn't like the first time I heard it. I've heard it multiple times, and so people, or if I was interested in a person, in a guy, and we talk about it after the fact. And they're like, oh, I liked you, but I was so intimidated by you because of what I heard. And so sometimes a lot of the rumors, it's not like what Tony said, it's not how I heard it about others, but it's how people perceived me. And so I
Yeah.
think that really got to me because people that I talk to a lot now, because like for them to say, yeah, we thought you were a snob, we thought you were a snob, and I'm like the nicest person out there. Unless you're mean to me, then that's a whole nother story. But normally I'm really nice. And so
Mm-hmm.
how people spread things when they don't know you, I think that affects you also. So
Mm-hmm. And like, I just wanna like this popped to mind when I was listening to your answers. You know, like when like people say something about like you or about someone else, like I always tend to think about like why that's the specific thing that they choose to focus on. Because usually it, and just speaking from my own experience, like um, that unless it directly involves like me or it's something that like that they want me to, it's not something I pay attention to a lot. Unless they've mentioned it to me myself, I usually would not. I usually would not care about about what's sort of like going on, and it's like sort of just say golden rule of like treating others how I want to be treated. And so when brings it up, someone brings it up, like for example, they're like, "Oh, did you know so and so? So and so is like this, so and so is like that." Like when someone brings it up, I tend to think of like, well, why is that the thing that stuck out to you? Like why is that the thing that you're focusing on? And it's a
Or
more like, oh, go ahead.
or what I like to ask him is, why are you saying that? What did they do for you to say that that's how they are? Because
Mm,
then that makes them think about the assumptions that they're making. You know what I mean? So I throw it back on them when, because, and for me, like, that saying goes, where you can't judge a book by its cover.
yeah.
That one really plays a big role in my life. And so when people try to influence me with the rumors that they make or the assumptions they make, I
Mhm,
throw it back at them and say, well, EJ, why do you think that person is like that? What did they do to you to make you say that, instead of
mhm,
just what you're hearing from everybody else?
mhm.
Can I also add to, like, with how information is now, how easily accessible it is?
Yeah.
I feel like people feel so strongly that they know what what is happening,
Yeah.
like with social media, with everything. It's just like they think that because they see these things, like, let's say you regularly post on social media and you post about your life, they think that they know everything about you, they know the details, and you see it happen all the time with
Mm,
like people, with like celebrities. There's always like scandals and stuff like that, like, oh, so and so's not wearing their wedding ring. They get people like pick at these little details and think that they know what's going on behind the scenes, but you
mhm.
don't know what's going on. And like it's dangerous because people, it's almost like a group think. Once you
Yeah.
get enough people to kind of like say the thing and repeat it so many times, that's
Mhm.
when people start to believe it. And it's like, well, you don't know that for sure, and you
Ask
can't
them
always
for
know
their
that.
source, and they just quote each other.
Yeah, and it's like, well, did you talk to the person? Like, did you actually talk to the person? That's a very different story. Like, if you talk to them and like they tell you like themselves, like that's what happened. Like, oh, okay. Or if you're there and you witnessed it yourself, like, okay, that's a different story. But like, if you're just grabbing it from these bits and pieces that people are sharing, just from social media, it can be super dangerous in that way. And I feel like, not to demonize social media, because social media is great. Like,
Mhm,
internet is great. It's such a great tool. But I think that if you're not careful, you can kind of get into that mindset of believing that you think you know what you know. And that was one of the things that I saw before. It's just like, you think you know what you know, but you don't know. You only think you know what you know. If I'm making sense, it's like
yes.
you know something, but you might not know the whole thing. And it's very, it can be dangerous to kind of create basis of things off just pieces, and it's very hard to do that, especially when you're dealing with people and people's reputation.
Mhm.
It's
And
Like, oh,
sometimes I see, when I do see that, I tend to wonder, like, why people are making those assumptions, or why do they like to spread those rumors? Sometimes I think people figure that they have, it's like they have nothing else going on in their life, but they have to
mm,
mind everyone else's business.
yes, yes. And and it makes me like you actually what you just said makes me think of like what I was gonna say earlier. Like like I feel like when people tend to like gravitate towards like a certain certain issue about like whichever like a celebrity or maybe someone that mutually, it makes me think of like I feel like this says more about you than it does about them, right? Like because if this is like that issue you're kind of like gravitating towards, like there may be something you need to unpack there from like your own maybe your own what's the from like maybe your own situation, right? Your own situation that like maybe or like even with just that or just what you mentioned, Arnie, just like when you don't really have a lot of things going on going on in your life. I hear this a lot. Like people crave drama, right? They say they don't. Yeah, they say they don't. Like I know a lot of people who would say like they don't like I don't like drama. I'm just a chill person. I don't I don't like drama. When there's drama, they're like their head is like kind of like tilted. Like, oh, what's this about? Their ears are like facing the direction. Like, oh, what's that they're talking about? And this is not me judging them because that's been me. That's been me at some point. That's been me at some point in my life where I said I don't like drama, but like as like when I hear people arguing, what's that about? Like I've inquired, I've asked like questions from like a third party, but from like then just and speaking from my like experience here, like to have the same happen to you, like when to have the same happen to you, like it really teaches you about like about how this makes that other person feel, and then that like with that I begin to think back on the times where I've been nosy with other people's business, and what? It's not a good feeling. It's not a good feeling to make like just to have people make assumptions about you, like rumors, like with the thing about like social media earlier, where it's dangerous because it's dangerous also in the way that like it's been what do you call it? Like it's been passed along so much that like that what they say about like rumors like snowballing. It's like snowballing. It's like with every retelling, like there's a detail added, there's a detail change that when you ask them, like uh your what's your source in this, and then they quote someone else who quotes someone else who quotes someone else, and you don't even know where it started. Like you don't even know where it started. It's just started with just using the example that Tony was uh, made earlier. Like when you get back to the root of it was just it was just an assumption that one person made that they shared to another person who thought, oh, maybe you're I know you have a point with that, and then shared it to someone else with details added, who shared it to someone else in another detail. Like it is added. Like it just tends to I don't know to it's not a good feeling to have people make those assumptions as well, or to to believe in rumors. Like sometimes, like when there were rumors, like like I've experienced having rumors made about me just being people. I was just shy. I was just shy. I wasn't antisocial, but that was the perception of a lot of people about me because of like one thing that someone said at some point. And and just to kind of, or sorry, do you want to share something before I?
No, add to that, like you said, sometimes people didn't tell you, but like you'll hear it from others.
Yeah,
It could be very hurtful, and like I said, sometimes people have no filters, and so when they make the assumptions, and then now everything's good, and they're like, yeah, I used to think you were like this, and I'm like, okay, I still don't want to hear it now. The rumor now. You can just keep it to yourself. You don't have to share it with me, because it's hurtful when what people think or what people say. And so I think that's something that everyone has to be careful of.
And yeah, like let's say like let's say maybe you've heard like a rumor about someone. It's sort of like affected the way you interacted with them. Maybe not even intentionally. Maybe just like what I forgot how I said earlier. Like you tend to trust them less, or you tend to maybe like like subconsciously just kind of like go back or kind of avoid them a little bit. Like when it ended up, like when rumors end up feeling, or and they ended up being not true at all, and when you get to the root of it, like how how do you think it makes someone feel? Like when you realize that, oh, I listened to this rumor and this rumor was wrong, or even if it was true, even if it was true, just the fact that you were part of like that chain, you know, of like rumors. Like, how do you think that makes someone feel?
Well, I know for me, sometimes, I mean, I try not to let others influence how I think or how I think of others. But sometimes, it's just in your face, and you give in. And there were times where, people would say things about others, and I would believe them and everything before I got to know them. And then sometimes I would feel really bad because some of the things they were saying was mean, and that's not how the person was. And once I start to feel bad, then I'll go out of my way to kind of dispel that rumor that people are spreading, or I would like just say, you need to get to know them because that's not how they are,
Mm-hmm.
or let them know how the person really is. Because even if you don't go along with it, but if you don't try to stop it, I think that could also be very hurtful. So that's why I tend to call people out on it. If I, like, let's say, oh yeah, Tony's goody two shoes. Okay, maybe she is, but what is wrong with that? And so I try to dispel people from saying things like that, because if she hears about it, of course, she'll be hurt. But then also, like I said from the start, you can miss out on great relationships just by the assumptions that you make or assumptions people make.
Mm-hmm. Then um, actually, just wanted to like add a question to that. And it was brought up earlier that I I was thinking of it, like in that sense, like will there ever kind of like be a situation where making an assumption is like justified? You think, like is there a situation where that's justified to make an assumption?
I guess it depends on what the assumption. I mean, is an assumption ever a good thing? Because with assumptions, what you're doing is you're basically like you're declaring something, or you're making a thought, or you're making a statement conclusive. You're putting a period there in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why it's an assumption is because you're already acknowledging that you don't know the full thing, right? That's why they always say, like, even in the workplace, it's hard to make assumptions, because when you make assumptions, you're like, oh, so and so's gonna know about that thing. Nope. Nope. You thought. And that's what ends up being the response afterwards, like, well, you thought. That's what you thought. And that's the whole idea between the separation of the topic, right? It's between thought and truth, is because there are a lot more things that get you to the truth before, when you start off with that initial thought, right? So, you're talking, EJ, about how it makes other people, like how it makes other people feel. Like, it it would make them feel, especially if it's people that you care about, that are believing or buying into things that aren't true about you, like,
Mm-hmm.
that's hurtful, right? Because, and I'm fortunate to have friends who will defend me until until the end, because they know who I am. Like, I have very, like, loyal friends who are like, no, like, that's not who she is, like, in terms of other things that might have come up in terms of rumors that I don't know about. Like I'm fortunate to have people who are there to talk good about me behind my back as opposed to talking bad. So that's another thing to kind of insert there. And then being on the end of being participating in it, that is a terrible feeling as well because then you're like, well, oh, I was wrong. And in my mind, what I what's what's hard to practice, but I still strive to do it, is that I would rather make an assumption in the sense of like I would rather assume the better in them and then be proven wrong later rather than assuming the worst and then feeling the regret of like, oh, I assumed the worst in you. So yeah.
I agree with that because it's easier. It's easier if people let you down as opposed to you letting someone down. Because if you think they were a bad person and then you realize you're wrong, sometimes it's hard to make up for that. But if you assume the person is great and they're really not, that's not too hard to come back from. So I totally agree with what you said. And Nate did add another thing which I thought was very insightful, and he said, I think what's more important is making sure you're giving off the best impression of yourself. You can't control what people think of you, but you can have a positive influence on it. And I think that's true because I know with some people, they just want to become famous. It doesn't matter what they become famous for or what they become famous for doing. And so sometimes they may do things that's inappropriate just so that they can get likes or views or followers, right? And so I think it's really important, like what he said, have a positive impression of yourself, a good impression of yourself. And then that way, hopefully, if people spread rumors, they're the good rumors. Like, oh, look, she's a nice person. She's not a snob, right?
Actually, I don't know why goody two shoes has been like an insult. It's like a good thing, isn't it? Like,
Yeah, it's always like there's a negative like denotation there. I don't know. Can I add one more thing, EJ? I know this
yeah,
show's closing out. There's something that I was because I love musicals, right? I love musicals a lot, and this will make sense in a minute because in a musical in theater, like you have the whole stage going on, and basically in like a commentary I heard recently, somebody said like as a viewer you are the one that's kind of like directing as opposed to like movies, right? In a movie the director cuts all the shots and like allows you to see what they want you to see, whereas in a stage play you are the one to kind of focus on whatever it is that you're focusing on. So the same can be true when making about assumptions, right? You have the decision on what you're going to focus on about a certain person. Like you have the decision whether or not in that instance that you experience that person, if you're going to make the assumption that, oh, this person's always late. Oh, this person doesn't know how to dress themselves because they arrived here looking like a slob. You don't know what kind of morning that they had. You don't know what stuff they're going through. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. It makes you really upset sometimes, right? But you don't know what kind of morning they had. Maybe they just received terrible news about a family member, or someone yelled at you because you're like in customer service and they like gave you like an earful on the phone, but they just received bad news that they're actually sick. So there are things that are happening in people's lives. These like events that we don't know about before we see them. They are a culmination of all these things that they go through. So it's always better to not make assumptions.
Looking for more conversations that matter? INC Radio Chat Line, Fridays at 8 p.m. Pacific or 11 p.m. Eastern at INC Radio DZEM 954 on YouTube.